This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
I want to start by saying you look exactly like you do in the picture in the magazine.
I was trying for that look. Yeah, I borrowed one of my son's hats just to do that.
It's awesome. You need the cigar and
That's all I need, right? I
right.
didn't bring a prop, but
So I want to start before the beginning, like before this happened, and kind of get the run up to before you're on the board. You were into computers. You were a student in New Orleans, I think, and so kind of set me up with the prehistory, if you would.
yeah, sure. So I actually grew up in Colorado, and I took my first basic programming class when I was in, I think, the eighth grade. Because at our junior high school, a couple of our math teachers had built their own computer, and it ran off of a big, huge console TV, and it looked a little bit like a big box Atari in a way, because it didn't have any of the peripherals integrated or anything, but it was something that they let us play on, and then they started. Organizing a class where they taught basic programming. And when we wrote our programs, we wrote them on paper with with pencil, and we turned them in, and the teacher would be reading these 100-line code, programs, and just sort of inferring what they were supposed to do, because we never actually got to try them,
Oh,
beyond maybe student every semester. Each student got to do it once or twice every semester because there was only one computer. But I really liked it. I liked math and I liked programming, and I was kind of a nerd or a geek, whichever, and I tended to get a crush on guys that liked technology and computers, and so that was where I started in the eighth grade. And then when we moved to Louisiana, which is where my parents' family is from. And it was a big upheaval for all of us socially, to go from living in the country in Colorado and riding horses and dirt bikes to living in the city in New Orleans and not being allowed to do anything but walk, so there was a certain element of time in there where we're just looking for new hobbies. And that's when I kind of got into gaming and playing Dungeons and Dragons, specifically with some people at our new school. And so for about 3 years in high school there, I was just kind of hanging out with the gaming crowd and or the D&D crowd. Then I had an opportunity to go to summer school at the University of Alabama. And this was what they called the Capstone Honors Program. And they let us take 2 college level classes. While we were still, I was a rising senior, I think. So that would have been 1982. And incidentally, one of the other students at this summer school program was Jimmy D. Wales. And I don't know if you know who that is. He's the co-founder of Wikipedia.
oh, Jimmy Wales, yeah, sure.
Yeah. And,
He's asking me for
and
money all the time.
me too. And he probably, I hope he doesn't remember me. Anyway, we were all kind of an interesting group, but we ran around together and we kind of tried to break into the University of Alabama computer. We took a computer science programming class, another basic class. They taught us about how to write programs on stacks of punch cards, and that was how mainframe computers worked at the time. And in general, had a really good summer. But when I came back to New Orleans, my college counselor found out that I had done this, had a college level class. And apparently there was an open call for students who liked computers to be put into what was essentially a raffle, I think, to join the Atari Youth Advisory Board. So we were like the first generation of students, and my name essentially got pulled out of a hat.
Wow.
And I was invited to be a member of the Atari Youth Advisory Board. So in early February, March, somewhere right in there of my senior year, they flew everybody out to, it was at Sunnyvale, I think, Sunnyvale,
Yes.
California.
Yep.
Yeah, and to the corporate offices. And we spent like a week there, just getting
Wow.
to know Atari and hanging out. And let me tell you, the best thing was the corporate game room.
Yeah.
You know, Pole Position, Caterpillar, you know, Galactic, all the best games were there, and they were free because I had spent my entire high school getting up at 6 in the morning and meeting my friends for a cup of espresso, you know, from like Morning Call or any of the normal New Orleans coffee houses, and then going out to the game shops and just playing arcade games all morning on Saturday. They opened at 6 a.m. and we would start early to beat the crowd.
Wow.
You know, and $5 allowance every week, and that's where it went.
Nice. So there was no application process or anything. It was just sort of a recommendation of someone who knew that you were into computers, and you got lucky.
That's it. Yeah. That's it. And I'll tell you what, it changed my life to have that opportunity and to just sort of look at myself differently as somebody who, you know, was out there on the creative edge of things, and then to have people recognize that, you know, being a part of that youth advisory board was an achievement, whether it really was or not, you know. It was a wonderful experience. It kind of changed the way that I approached everything in my later career, because I learned to take chances. You know, I learned to just kind of put myself out there. And so that initial week while we were there, I think there were 7 or 8 people there, and they had us paired up in a hotel room with so we had a roommate. And just down the hall from me was Todd Bridges. And now Todd Bridges has got lots of personality, and he was one of the luminary members of the advisory board, you know, because I'm sure he was into computers, but they really wanted him there to kind of catch the interest of the press and everything. Sure. And the same was true with Matthew Labordeaux, because Matthew Labordeaux was currently at that time the star of a sitcom called The Whiz Kid.
Oh, and, sure, the guy with the big glasses.
That's
the show.
The one.
Yeah, okay.
And he used to be on Little House on the Prairie before that,
right.
I think, right?
I tried to interview him. He did not respond, but yeah, I know who it is.
No problem. You might get a response from Todd, but I don't know what it would be. But he is an interesting guy. And the one thing I remember about him is they took us to a special screening of a movie, and I couldn't for the life of me tell you what movie it was, but we went to one of the Hollywood studios special screening rooms, and they gave all of us, they had a 50-gallon bag of popcorn. It was like a trash bag sized thing of popcorn. Uh-huh. And they let us take it back to the hotel room. And so we were all goofing around, you know, kind of going around from room to room, having a traveling party, you know, teenage style. Mm-hmm. And carrying the popcorn with us. And Todd comes into my room, and my roommate's name was Elizabeth, and he starts swinging this popcorn bag around over his head, uh-huh. Right? And it breaks.
Of course.
And there is popcorn everywhere. And I was just like, well, he gave me a lesson in charm. I was just beside myself, afraid that we were going to get in serious trouble, you know, like chaperone style, where they like cut the trip short and send you home. And because that's what the Girl Scouts or the high school, you know, chaperones or whatever would have done. But,
sure.
But Todd charmed the maid into coming in and vacuuming the room up and cleaning it all up. So, I mean, it still smelled like popcorn, but we were like 4 inches deep in popcorn, I'm telling you. She comes in, she cleans it all up, she vacuums it up, and I think he autographed his toothbrush and gave it to her or something like that. And that was how he charmed her into helping us out. It was pretty funny. Wow. And then the last day, I remember we did a lot of programming workshops. We talked to the press. We toured all the facilities at Atari. And the last day, they sat us all down and they said, well, what do you guys think about computers? Because up until this time, they had not really been big on the computer market, but they had just recently signed a deal with Intel to start putting Intel processors into their gaming systems and their computers. Mm-hmm. And so computers were not a thing with Atari. And I was like, well, you know what I really want? I'm talking to my parents right now because I want a PC. You know, I've decided that I do Apple, Macintosh work at school, and I just really would rather have a PC and be able to do my own operating system programming and stuff like that. And they were all looking at each other. It was like, okay, well, that was not what we were expecting to hear. But they gave us an Atari computer. Each one of us got an Atari computer. And then throughout the next year and a half or so, they would contact us about possible projects that we could work on or help them with. And so that was kind of cool.
Cool.
And then
what kind of projects?
Well, typically it was like programming projects. Either we would be the front for a publicity event where they were giving computers to schools, or they were teaching kids to program, and we would go in there. They had this special programming language called Turtle, which was a visual programming language.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think you're thinking of Logo, probably.
It might be Logo, yeah. I just remember the traveling graphic turtles.
Yeah, there was a little turtle that on the screen. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they taught us how to do graphics with Logo, and then we would go in and teach something to the kids. And I don't think that my name was pulled out of the hat for an assignment like that, but I did get to go to the Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago.
Tell me about that.
Oh, that was awesome. So
were you like working at the Atari booth, or just like free reign to check out everything, or what happened?
Oh no, we got to work at the Atari booth. In fact, they had a whole press event, where they all the press got to interview us about, what great young prodigies we were, I guess is the idea. But what we really did was stand around and play games. And that was okay too. We played the latest computers. People would walk up and we would show them what we were doing. We talked to the press and explained what a great thing the Atari Youth Advisory Board was. And we went out to eat deep dish pizza at the original Uno's. This is like 30 years ago, so some of my memories are a little bit vague, but that's what I remember about the Consumer Electronics Show. And I believe that we also had lunch with Alda.
Really?
Point, yeah, because I think he was brought on to be the spokesperson for Intel for a very short period of time.
He was the Atari spokesperson for the commercial TV commercials and print ads and things. Yeah.
There you go. So we actually met and had lunch with Alda. So the thing I remember about that was everybody piling into this big, huge limo. And like Alan was in the middle, and there's like all these kids on either side of him. There were about 6 of us, and so that was pretty cool. And then at lunch, I just remember him talking about how great it was that we were all up on the technology, and that and he told us some stuff about his kids and stuff. But that's all I remember. He was a really nice guy. I remember that, but I don't think that relationship between him and Atari lasted for very long, and I think that. Shortly after that there was a major restructuring or something.
Yeah, July 1984, the Tray Mills bought the company, and all fun stuff like this stopped. So yeah,
exactly. But it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to do all that stuff, and for a year or two after, or maybe a year after that, I kept in charge with the communications person that had been in charge of our group, just to keep talking to her and stuff. Her name was Noreen Lavoie, I remember. And I have no idea what she's doing now. I imagine she's 30 years older, just like me.
I would hope so. All right, so you did the tour, and they sent you a Atari 1200 XL, and according to the article, they kept sending you confidential boxes of prototype software to try. What do you remember about that?
I don't remember much about that. I don't remember that part. I remember Logo, and I remember like I said, those special projects, where they would send us, and every once in a while they would send something. But I think that once I graduated from high school, and the trip to the Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago was like right after I graduated from high school. And right after that, I was kind of like maybe aged off. I became a emeritus member or something like that. And I have no idea how long I continued the group after that.
Probably not very long. I don't know.
It was because that would have been 1983 was when I graduated. So And I went to Johns Hopkins. So when I say that it brought a lot of opportunities for me, obviously getting into Johns Hopkins was one of them.
Really?
You know, because certainly I had good grades, but so does just about everybody that applies there. You know, and I think that this kind of made me stand out a little bit. And it kind of gave me the idea that if you really want something, go ahead and ask for it. You know, and I've used that philosophy moving forward in my life to just kind of put myself out there a little bit more than I would have otherwise. So it's a pretty good lesson for somebody who's 18 to learn, I think.
Absolutely. Cool. So the article said there was 20 members on this board, but you sounds like you've met 8 or 9 other people when you were on your tour.
Right. So in the beginning, there were absolutely 20, and I used to be able to name them all, but I can't anymore. And and I could probably remember them by their first names and not their last names if you really pressed me. But even after that, I think they kept, they brought in a few at a time after those of us that graduated, and there was one other person from New Orleans whose dad was at the time a professor at Tulane. I remember him because we were on the plane together, and his name is Yoon Ho Park. And I don't know what he's up to. And then
you did that trip without parents?
Yes.
Wow.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was quite exciting for the times.
What did your parents think about this whole thing?
My parents are they were divorced when I was about 10. And so they had pretty much by necessity taught us to be reasonably good travelers because we went back and forth between their homes. And so I knew a lot about, I think my parents would have been more upset if I hadn't already had a lot of experience with traveling through airports, with my brothers and on my own. But
Sure.
it worked out pretty good.
Yeah. No, I just meant, what do they think of the whole experience of like you're on this board, hobnobbing with technology people?
Well, I mean, they use it to brag about me, or they'd use it against me as the occasion warranted, right?
Sure.
Well, you think you're such a hot shot, but you can't keep your room clean, that kind of thing. But I think that they were proud of me because I know my mom has always, kind of referred to me as her genius daughter, and probably dates back to around that time. And I'm not at all going to validate that statement, whether it's true or not.
The article said you were working on your own game, an adventure game that you were creating. Did anything ever come of that?
No, not really. I mean, what I was doing was learning to program games. And when I got into, I guess I shouldn't say not really. When I got into college, I spent about the first 2 or 3 years trying to learn how to be smart with other smart people. I will tell you this, that in high school, it was very easy for me to get good grades. And the advantage, of course, is that I could prove how smart I was by not working hard. But it became a self-identifying characteristic of my personality that I didn't work too hard. And I didn't develop any good study skills because I didn't need them. When I got to college, and everybody who was in the freshman class was pretty much just as accomplished and smart as I was, and the classes were really, really hard. I struggled for a while to do well in college, and I had to learn those study skills that I hadn't learned before. So I was kind of occupied for a couple of years doing that. But when I was a junior, I met somebody, a professor at Johns Hopkins, who was also a graduate of my high school in New Orleans. That was how we got introduced to each other, so to speak. And he hired me to work in his lab. His lab was the sensory aids lab, and he was involved with various ways to help deaf children learn how to speak using signal processing. This is back in the day before all audio signals were digital. Most audio back in the 80s was really analog audio. And he was he was one of the pioneers that was making the transition towards digital audio on computing devices. And he was creating games that would help deaf children learn to speak. So if an audiologist was working with a deaf child and try to get them to pronounce a phoneme in a certain way, they could play this game, and the game or computer would analyze the sound of the child's voice and match it against the phoneme and if they got it correct, then a little frog would hop from one lily pad to another, or a rocket ship would swerve out of the way of an asteroid or something like that. So for 2 years, I was involved in his lab. It had personal significance to me because ever since I've been 13, I've been hard of hearing. And at the time, I did not wear hearing aids. Now I do, because hearing aids now are wonderful and amazing. But back then, it had personal significance that you could improve the quality of somebody's life by helping them speak better or hear better. And I was really interested in signal analysis. That became sort of my computer engineering focus from that point on. My job, by the way, in that lab was to draw the animation characters.
Oh, the hopping frogs and things like that? Nice.
Yeah, that's right. Hopping frogs and the dancing bears and everything like that. So nice. I was very much into the graphics.
What do you do today?
Well, I'm a tutor, and I was a high school teacher and also an adjunct professor at some different universities and an academic scientist. I've been a lot of things. I don't really think that we should all just boil ourselves down to one thing. But after I got an electrical engineering and computer science degree at Johns Hopkins, I went to Tulane and I got a master's in biomedical engineering. While I was at Tulane, I took a class on digital image processing, and I learned about how CT scanners work. And I was just completely enamored, totally fell in love with the idea that you could join medicine in that way and do medical imaging with computers. And that became the focus of pretty much my entire professional career. I transferred to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and got a PhD in biomedical imaging. And my PhD thesis was how one would go about measuring or validating any kind of technique that merges multiple images together. So a CT scan and an MR scan showed different kinds of detail. CT scans tend to show bony detail, and MRI scans tend to show soft tissue detail. And it's reasonable to think that a doctor might want to look at both. But back in the early 90s, they would have to sit with two monitors side by side and try to mentally merge the two. And so we were working with some of this state-of-the-art software that would actually merge those for you using mathematical transformations, find the best possible alignment between the two, and then show you overlay images so that you could integrate all that information in one. And all of that work had previously been done by the graduate student that came before me and some people at the University of Chicago that collaborated with us. But my job was to answer the question, well, how do you know it's a good fit? And so that was what my PhD thesis was all about. And following that, I went to London, and I was at Guy's Hospital in London working on computer-aided brain surgeries. And so we would wheel the computer, and we would have the surgeon hold a stylus in the operating room and point to something on the patient, and the MRI images and the CT images would pop up on the screen in the orientation that he was holding the stylus. Now, all of this sounds pretty standard now, right? But in 1995, that was the state of the art. Yeah. And I had the privilege of being one of the people that helped develop and validate that kind of stuff. Nice. And I moved on and had a family and kind of settled down. Decided to teach high school for a while when my boys were in high school, and didn't like being a high school teacher so much because I think that, it helps if kids are motivated to learn. Yeah. And being a high school teacher is babysitting. I mean, no offense to the kids, but
Yeah.
but that's just what high school was like. And I was used to being a leader by consensus and not by any kind of authoritarian, management. Anyway, but I'm a private tutor now in Las Vegas, and I can tutor just about anything but Spanish, at the high school level, and so that's what I do.
Nice. So back to this article. Do you know how this magazine article happened? How'd they find you?
I think again maybe, well, I think because of some of the interviews that they did the first time they brought us out to California, and then also at the Consumer Electronics Show, they would have us stand up and talk to reporters, and that would be a 20-second segment on a news show or something, right? But I think they kind of liked the way the attitude that I had when it came to just speaking to adults. And so when Family Computing said, well, we want to interview somebody, maybe they had a top 5 list and my name got picked. Maybe by random, maybe not. They never tell us the good parts like that, right?
Yeah. Did the writer come to your home, or were you interviewed over the phone, or what?
That was my real bedroom.
Yeah. The writer took this is a great picture of you.
It really is. We staged it a little bit,
Yeah.
but when he showed up at 6 a.m, I had cleaned my room. That's where you're a genius and you can't clean your room comment came from. I had cleaned my room. I really did have a desk set up in my room with my Atari computer on the desk, and the doll really did sit on top of the monitor. I had the hat ready, and he said, "You know what? This is great because I brought a cigar." And then I think we did have a phone interview before and after the photo session to just kind of pull everything together.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. Very good. Well done.
Was that the first issue of Family Computing magazine?
Yeah.
I seem to remember that, and I think they gave me 4 or 5 copies, but over the years they've just sort of gone the way of water damage. But I'm so glad I found that electronic version.
You don't still have your Atari, do you?
No, I wish. About 3 or 4 years after I went to college, I have a little brother who's 12 years younger than me, and I gave it to him. And I'm sure it's like at some garage sale if it hasn't been thrown in the garbage,
Sure, it happens.
No, I was going to say maybe it went the way of all of those ET 2600 game cartridges.
I hope not.
Rated on the landfill somewhere. Huh?
Right, it's in a landfill in New Mexico.
And from what I understand, they really did find a lot of game cartridges that had just been dumped there.
Yes.
It was sort of like surplus as opposed to specifically that game, though. Huh?
Yeah, it was a lot of surplus and things sent back from stores, returns and things, and a variety of things, I guess. Yeah. So, all right. So, what haven't I asked you about that a time that I should have?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think I know the answer. If you asked me a question, it would probably bring back memories. But I think, that we covered just about everything that I can remember,
Okay.
about how it worked and what happened.
It sounds amazing and fun, and you have to tell me I'm not wrong.
No, you're not wrong. It was amazing. It would be like all of a sudden, you wouldn't hear anything for 1 or 2 months. And then you'd get this phone call out of the blue. It was like, well, what are you doing in 2 weeks? And then you'd fly off to somewhere. It was kind of cool.
Yeah.
In an age where teenagers weren't as mobile as they are now,
Mm-hmm.
it was very cool. And I remember, I will tell you this, my favorite physics teacher was my high school physics teacher, David Derbies. And I want to mention David because he is just such an inspiration to me, even now as a teacher and everything. But he's also got a mind that he remembers all of these things, about stuff that happened that I don't even remember. And he told me that he actually remembers my grade in physics the last semester going down just a little bit because I was so busy doing things for Atari. It's like, and he wrote on the report card, I still have the report card, and I went and looked at it, and it says something like, well, she had a lot of stuff going on this semester, and that may be why she got a B plus instead of an A, but she's done a great job, and I wish her all the best. It was pretty funny. And David, by the way, he got his PhD from the University of Edinburgh, and his dissertation advisor was Peter Higgs. And so when Peter got the Nobel Prize, he invited David to go to the award ceremony with him. So amazing. I can literally tell people that there are three, when I teach physics as a tutor, I tell people, well, you're 3 or 4 degrees away from a Nobel Prize winner.
Nice.
And then I say something like, Isaac Newton was 23 when he invented the universal law of gravity. What are you going to do with your life? That's kind of intimidating, but it's fun. It's fun to say stuff like that.
Nice. All right, I think this is my last question. If you could send a message to the Atari computer users that still exist and are listening to this podcast, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Oh, very good. I think I would tell them to keep looking for unique and interesting ways to make use of this technology. We are all bound in this great circle of modern life. And the great circle of modern life is this. We are given a certain amount of resources, whether it's our intelligence or the amount of money we have or the amount of time that we have. And these are what we use to spend, to create the world that we live in. And we tend to take our time and spend it to earn money. Then we take our money and we buy technology. And we buy the technology so that we can get back our time. And it's the same amount of time that we had in the beginning. I don't incorporate technology into my life anymore, even though I'm a technophile, obviously, and I think it's very, very cool. But I don't incorporate technology into my life anymore unless it makes my life either simpler or more efficient, because you could spend all of your time digging down, figuring out how things work, and it might just make your life more complicated. If there's anything that they could do with their Atari computers that makes somebody's life better, or makes it simpler, or gives them more time to spend that time with people that they love, then that's what they should use it for. And sounds like there was a guy who created a fireworks show using an Atari computer, right?
Yeah.
And that sounds like a good way to enrich somebody's life.
I think so.
That's what I would use technology for. That's the message that I would send to everybody.
Great. Thank you, Kerrie.
All right.
That's
you bet,
perfect.
Kevin. Thanks for getting in contact.
Appreciate it.
Enjoyed talking to you.
Enjoyed talking to you.